The story begins with the protagonist, perhaps a weary traveler, an investigative journalist, or a lost tourist, stumbling upon a secluded village hidden away from the main roads. The moment they cross the village boundary, an unsettling quiet settles over the landscape. The air feels thick, as if time itself moves slower here. The houses, though well kept, have an archaic quality, as though the village has resisted change for decades, maybe centuries. As the protagonist walks down the lone dirt road, they notice the villagers going about their daily routines, farmers tending to crops, women hanging laundry, children playing. But there's something off about them. Their movements are measured, their voices hushed. When they notice the stranger, their conversations falter. Eyes flicker toward them, not with hostility, but with something worse. Apprehension. A silent understanding passes between the villagers, as if the mere presence of an outsider is a disturbance. The protagonist seeks shelter, perhaps an inn, a tavern, or the home of a reluctant host. The innkeeper, an elderly man with deep-set eyes and a voice like gravel, offers a room but hesitates before handing over the key. His grip tightens for a moment, and he leans in just slightly. "You'll want to be inside before dark," he says, his tone leaving no room for debate. When the protagonist asks why, the man's face hardens. "It's just the way things are here." Outside, the sun hangs low, casting long shadows that seem to stretch unnaturally. A child, bolder than the rest, tugs at the protagonist's sleeve and whispers, "They don't like it when people are out at night." Before they can ask who they are, a villager yanks the child away, shooting the stranger a warning glance. As dusk creeps in, the village transforms. Doors lock, windows shutter. The once bustling streets empty in minutes, as if an unspoken curfew has been enforced for generations. The protagonist watches from their window, the last flickers of daylight fading, and wonders what could possibly be so dangerous that an entire village would hide from the night. And then, just as the final light vanishes, something moves at the edge of the forest, something that doesn't walk quite right. The rules of this village are not suggestions, they are survival. The road had been empty for miles, just twisting forest paths and the occasional glimpse of a fading sunset through the trees. Then, quite suddenly, the woods gave way to a village. It wasn't on any map. It wasn't supposed to be here. The first thing you noticed was the silence. No cars, no radios, not even the hum of electricity. Just the creak of old wooden signs swaying in the wind. The houses were clustered close, their thatched roofs and smoke-stained chimneys straight out of another century. A few villagers paused in their work, chopping wood, mending fences, and stared, not with hostility but with the wary tension of deer catching a human scent. You approached the nearest one, a stooped woman with hands knotted from decades of labor. "Excuse me?" you began, but she flinched before you even finished. Up close, her eyes were glassy with something you couldn't name. Fear, maybe, or resignation. "Traveler," she said, not as a greeting but as a diagnosis. "You'll want the inn, down the lane, the one with the black door." She pointed a trembling finger, then added quieter, "Be inside before dark." The innkeeper was a thick-necked man with a beard like tangled wire. He didn't ask for your name, just slid a rusted key across the counter. The room, he explained, was at the top of the stairs, last door on the left. No supper served after sunset, no exceptions. You might have laughed if not for the way his fingers tapped the countertop. Not nervous, counting down the minutes. Outside, the village was emptying. A bell tolled somewhere, not the cheerful chime of a church, but the slow, hollow clang of a warning. Doors slammed, shutters latched. An old man herded two children inside, their faces pale as they glanced at the tree line. One of them mouthed a word you couldn't catch. Your room had a window overlooking the square. You watched as the last villager, a boy no older than 12, dashed across the cobblestones, his breath puffing in the cold. He vanished into a house. A bolt slid shut. Then nothing. That's when you heard it. Not from the village. From the forest. A sound like branches snapping. Except branches don't snap in rhythm. Branches don't sound like footsteps. You reached to draw the curtain. Outside, in the dying light, something stood at the edge of the trees, watching, waiting for dark. The horror comes from what's not said, the villagers' silent dread, the absence of modern noise. The rusted key, the black door, the beard like tangled wire, each adds texture to the fear. The warning, be inside before dark, is more terrifying because no one explains why. Their obedience is the proof. The monster stays hidden, but the boy's whispered word, the rhythmic footsteps, all hint this village knows something primal about the dark. You hadn't meant to come here. Your map showed nothing but wilderness between Gray Marsh and the coastal highway, yet here it was, a village hunched in the valley like a sleeping beast. The sign at the crossroads was so weathered you had to scrape away moss to read it. Black Hollow. Population 87. No one had mentioned Black Hollow. Not the bartender in Gray Marsh who'd warned you about the storms coming down from the mountains, not the trucker who'd given you a lift halfway here before suddenly remembering an appointment and leaving you on the roadside with your pack and a nervous smile. The first house stood crooked in the damp earth, its windows shuttered despite the afternoon sun. An old woman rocked on the porch, her knitting needles clicking like insect mandibles. She didn't look up as you passed, but the rocking chair stilled just long enough to let you know she'd seen you. The inn wasn't hard to find. It was the only building with a lit lantern, its greasy glow seeping through the dirty glass. Inside, the air smelled of wet wool and something sharper underneath, like meat left too long in the smokehouse. The innkeeper was a slab of a man with one milky eye and fingers stained yellow from decades of rolling cigarettes. He didn't ask your name, just slid the ledger across the counter. The last entry was dated 3 weeks ago. J. Carter, room 4, and someone had carefully drawn a line through it in red ink. "Storm coming," the innkeeper said, though the sky through the open door was clear. "Best stay tonight." You took the key. Outside, the village was preparing for evening. A boy dragged a squealing pig into a barn, its hooves leaving dark streaks in the dirt. 2 women hurried past with armfuls of laundry, their eyes darting to the tree line. Somewhere, a door slammed with the finality of a coffin lid. Your room was at the top of the stairs, the floorboards groaning underfoot like living things. The bed sagged in the middle, its sheets smelling faintly of lye and old sweat. A single candle flickered on the nightstand. No electricity then. You almost missed the scratches on the doorframe. 4 parallel grooves, deep enough to show pale wood beneath the stain. Something had clawed its way in, or out. The window offered a view of the square below. As you watched, the last villager, a girl in a tattered blue dress, darted across the cobblestones, her bare feet slapping against the stone. She vanished into a house, and for a moment, silence settled over Black Hollow. Then the bell began to toll. Not from the chapel, that building stood dark and empty at the edge of town, but from the woods. A single, sour note that shivered the glass in its frame. The candle went out. Downstairs, the innkeeper bolted the door. Outside, something scraped against the wall of the inn. And from the forest, a chorus of answering cries rose into the twilight, not animal, not human, but something that had learned to imitate both. You reached for the curtain. The last sliver of sun vanished behind the trees, and in the square below, the shadows began to move. Every detail, the red-lined ledger, the claw marks, the unnatural bell, builds tension without explanation. The smell of meat left too long in the smokehouse, the sound of scraping against the inn walls. The villagers' silent rituals speak volumes about the unseen threat. The horror comes from the village's relationship with darkness. Would you like to continue into the protagonist's first night? I can escalate the terror while maintaining this slow burn literary horror style. The candle's dying gasp left the room in darkness, but the village outside was not entirely still. A slow creeping fog had begun to unspool from the forest's edge, swallowing the cobblestones whole. You stood frozen at the window, fingers still clutching the curtain you'd meant to close. The bell had stopped ringing, but its echo clung to the air like a bad taste. Then, movement. At first, you told yourself it was just the fog shifting, curling in on itself as the temperature dropped. But fog didn't move like that. It didn't pause at doorways, didn't press itself against window panes as if peering inside. A floorboard creaked downstairs. The innkeeper was still awake. You could hear the deliberate, heavy steps of a man checking locks, then the muffled scrape of furniture being dragged across the floor, barricading the door. You should have stepped away from the window. You should have blown out the candle, pulled the threadbare blanket over your head, and waited for dawn like a child hiding from a storm. But the village had sewn its secrets too tightly, and now the thread was pulling loose. A sound from outside, wet and thick, like a butcher's knife separating gristle from bone. Your breath fogged the glass as you leaned closer, squinting. The girl in the blue dress was still out there. She stood in the center of the square, her back to you, her shoulders rising and falling in ragged hitches. Not crying, not running, just waiting. The fog coiled around her ankles. You raised your hand to knock on the window, to call out, but then she turned, slowly, as if something had whispered her name. Her face was wrong, not mangled, not monstrous, just wrong, like a reflection in a warped mirror. Her mouth moved, forming words you couldn't hear. Behind her, the fog thickened, taking shape. Tall, hungry. A hand clamped over your mouth from behind. You thrashed, elbow connecting with something solid. The innkeeper grunted but didn't let go. Quiet, he hissed, his breath sour with tobacco and fear. He dragged you away from the window, his grip iron tight. Outside, the girl's head snapped toward the inn. She smiled. The innkeeper yanked the curtain shut just as the first shadow touched the porch steps below. Her unnatural stillness and distorted face suggest she's no longer entirely human, or never was. The innkeeper's intervention. His rough rescue implies this isn't the first time an outsider has risked drawing attention. The fog's sentient movements and the girl's reaction confirm the village's predators are far more cunning than mere beasts. Would you like to continue into the protagonist's confrontation with the innkeeper? I can delve into the whispered warnings and the first real revelations of what lurks in Black Hollow's nights. The innkeeper's calloused hand remained clamped over your mouth until the last echo of scraping claws faded from the porch below. When he finally released you, his milky eye gleamed in the dark like a sliver of bone. "You damn fool," he growled, voice low as embers. "They know now. They always know." A floorboard groaned somewhere down the hall. The innkeeper went still, his breath held. From outside came a new sound, something heavy being dragged across cobblestones, punctuated by wet, ragged breathing. You opened your mouth to speak, but he silenced you with a look. With one gnarled finger, he pointed upward. The ceiling. Something was in the attic. Scratching. Not the random skittering of rats, but deliberate, patient strokes, like a butcher sharpening his knife before the cut. The innkeeper motioned you toward the door. As you crept into the hallway, the smell hit you. Coppery and thick, the stench of a slaughterhouse in midsummer. It came from under the door at the end of the hall, the one marked with 4 parallel grooves in the wood. Room 4, J. Carter's room. The scratching above grew louder. A fine rain of dust sifted through the ceiling boards as something shifted its weight directly overhead. The innkeeper pressed a rusted key into your palm. "Cellar," he mouthed. "Now." As you turned toward the stairs, the attic door above you creaked open, and something began to weep, not in fear, in hunger, deepening the horror. The weeping entity suggests a tragic history, perhaps a former guest who didn't heed warnings. The claw marks match those on your door frame, revealing this has happened before. His immediate action implies a grim routine for dealing with noticed outsiders. Would you like to continue into the cellar's revelations, or should we escalate the attic confrontation first? I can craft either scene with the same suffocating atmosphere. The innkeeper's fingers dug into your arm like iron shackles as he dragged you back from the window. His breath came in ragged gasps, carrying the sour stench of old whiskey and rotting teeth. "One look," he hissed, his milky eye wild in the candlelight. "That's all it takes for them to know you've seen. Now they'll come." Outside, the fog had swallowed the girl whole, but something else moved in its depths, shapes that flowed like oil on water, their outlines shifting between human and something else. The scraping noise from the porch had stopped. That was worse. The innkeeper bolted your bedroom door and dragged the heavy oak dresser across it with surprising strength. His hands shook as he lit 3 more candles, their flickering light revealing deep grooves in the floorboards, not from furniture, but from something being dragged repeatedly toward the closet. "Listen close," he whispered, pressing a flask of something pungent into your hands. "Drink. It'll dull the scent." The liquid burned like fire going down. Outside, the wind began to howl. Except it wasn't the wind. The cries rose and fell in unnatural harmony, sometimes sounding like a woman sobbing, sometimes like a wounded animal. A thump from above made you jump. The attic. Something heavy had rolled across the floor. The innkeeper didn't even look up. "They always check there first," he muttered, pulling a worn Bible from his coat pocket. The pages fell open to Psalms, the margins filled with frantic handwritten notes. Then the knocking started. Not at the door, at the window. 3 slow, deliberate raps that made the glass vibrate in its frame. The innkeeper's head snapped up. His face went gray. "Oh God," he breathed. "They've brought the bride." From outside came the sound of something wet, dragging itself up the side of the building, leaving a trail of thick, black sludge on the window pane. The candle flames suddenly burned blue, casting ghastly shadows that moved independently of their sources. The innkeeper grabbed your face, forcing you to meet his terrified gaze. "When I tell you, run for the cellar. Don't look back, don't stop for anything, and whatever you do..." A long, skeletal finger tapped at the window again. "Don't let her see you blink." Introduces a new, more dangerous entity with specific hunting behaviors. The black sludge and blue fire show reality warping as the supernatural encroaches, establishes specific eerie dangers. Blinking, scent, being seen, revealed as a decoy or first line of defense against intruders. Would you like to continue with the desperate cellar escape, or should we explore the tragic history of the bride through the innkeeper's frantic revelations? I can take the story in either direction with equally chilling detail. The cellar door groaned like a living thing as the innkeeper shoved you inside. The darkness swallowed you whole, thick and suffocating, smelling of damp earth and something older, something that had been buried long before the first stones of Black Hollow were laid. You stumbled down the rough-hewn steps, your hands scraping against walls that were not quite wood, not quite stone, something in between, something that pulsed faintly beneath your fingertips. The innkeeper's final warning echoed in your skull. Don't light a flame, don't make a sound, and don't trust the whispers. Above, the inn shuddered under the weight of something moving through it. The floorboards screamed as unseen feet dragged across them, slow and deliberate. The bride was inside now. You crouched in the dark, heart hammering, ears straining. Then, a whisper. Not from above, from behind you. It wasn't language, not really, just sounds, wet and clicking, forming words you understood without knowing how. Look, it breathed. You didn't want to. But the dark pressed in, and the silence was worse, and before you could stop yourself, you turned. The cellar wasn't empty. Figures stood frozen along the walls, their faces slack, their eyes wide and unseeing. Not corpses, not quite. Their chests rose and fell in shallow, ragged breaths. Some were dressed in old-fashioned clothes, their fabrics rotting off their bodies. Others looked fresher, a man in a trucker's jacket, a woman in hiking gear. Jay Carter. His mouth was sewn shut with thick black thread, but his eyes screamed. The whisper came again, closer now. They followed the rules too late. A sound from above, the attic door crashing open. The bride was searching. You pressed deeper into the cellar, your back hitting something soft. A hand, cold, clammy. It twitched at your touch. And then, from the far corner, a match flared to life. The innkeeper stood there, his face gaunt in the sudden light. He raised a finger to his lips. Outside, the wind howled. Inside, the whispers began to laugh. Reveals the fate of those who broke the rules. Alive, but trapped, their bodies claimed by the village's curse. Her relentless search upstairs contrasts with the creeping horror below, tightening the tension. Introduce a new layer of terror, something sentient in the dark, playing with its prey. His sudden reappearance raises questions. Is he helping, or is he part of the trap? Would you like to continue into the confrontation with the bride, or should we explore the whisper's origins? The story can spiral deeper into the village's curse or escalate into a desperate escape. Your choice. You told yourself you wouldn't do it. You swore on the innkeeper's Bible, on the graves you'd glimpsed behind the chapel, on whatever thin thread of sanity still tethered you to the world before Black Hollow. But 3 nights of listening to the scratching at the windows, 3 nights of breathing in the cellar's damp rot while things moved through the rooms above, that changes a person. The plan formed in the cowardly hours before dawn, when the village held its breath, and even the bride's weeping ceased. The innkeeper snored in his chair by the dead hearth, his shotgun across his lap, his flask empty. You took 3 things, the rusted key from his pocket, the oil lantern from the hook, and the bone-handled knife he'd used to slice his supper. The door groaned when you opened it, but not loud enough to wake the dead. Or the innkeeper. Outside, Black Hollow lay bathed in moonlight so thick it looked like fog. The houses stood dark and silent, their windows shuttered, their doors barred. But something was different tonight. The air smelled electric, like before a storm. The cobblestones gleamed wet, though it hadn't rained. You lit the lantern. The flame burned steady at first, casting long shadows that danced across the empty square. Then, as you passed the chapel, the glass began to frost over. Your breath came in white puffs. The temperature plummeted. That's when you saw them. Footprints. Not in the dirt, not in the dew, but in the frost that shouldn't have been there, forming perfect circles where something had stood and watched and waited. The forest called to you. It wasn't curiosity anymore. It was compulsion. The trees whispered your name, their branches clicking together like bone chimes. The path opened before you, the undergrowth parting as if something had just passed through. You followed. The clearing was new. The villagers would have warned you about it. At its center stood a well so old the stones were black with lichen, its mouth gaping like a wound. The air here was dead. No wind, no sound, no turning back. The lantern flame turned blue. From the well came a sound like 100 hands scrabbling against wet stone. Then silence. Then a voice, your voice, calling up from the dark. "Help me," it pleaded. "I fell. It's so cold down here." You knew it wasn't you. You knew. But the part of you that still remembered sunlight, that still longed for roads that didn't circle back to Black Hollow, that part leaned over the edge. The lantern slipped from your fingers. It fell forever. And in its dying light, you saw them, the faces in the walls, waiting, hungry, alive. Reveals the village's curse doesn't just punish curiosity, it invites transgression, warping the protagonist's will, introduces a new horror, something that learns its victims' voices to lure them closer, expands the mythology, showing the true fate of those who disappear after dark. The protagonist's choices now have physical consequences in the environment. Frost footprints, unnatural path. Would you like to continue with the escape attempt, or should we descend into the well's revelations? The story can spiral deeper into cosmic horror or pivot toward a desperate bid for survival. Your fingers clutched at the crumbling well stones as the last flicker of lantern light vanished into the abyss. The voice, your voice, continued calling up from below, each syllable perfectly mimicking your own breathing patterns, the slight rasp you developed from nights spent in the damp cellar. "Please," it wept. "I see light above. Reach down, just reach down." The stones beneath your palms pulsed with a slow, rhythmic vibration. Not the earth shifting, something breathing. That's when you noticed the carvings. Faint at first, then clearer as your eyes adjusted. Names and dates stretching back centuries, all etched with the same jagged implement. The most recent, J. Carter. October 23rd. Fresh enough that stone dust still clung to the grooves. From the forest behind, you came a sound like 100 dry branches snapping at once. You turned to see the trees twisting unnaturally, their trunks contorting as if trying to uproot themselves. The path back had closed. The voice in the well changed. Now it was the innkeeper's. "Fool boy," it spat with his exact whiskey-rough cadence. "You think you're the first to try running? Look at the stones. Look at what happens to those who—" A wet crunch cut it off. The sound of teeth meeting flesh. Silence. Then, a new sound rose from the blackness, singing, a child's nursery rhyme in a voice that hadn't been human for a very long time. Black Hollow, hollow bones. The first skeletal fingers emerged from the well's mouth. Where the dead walk all alone. They weren't reaching for you. They were pulling something up. Something that wore your face. Not just a hole, but a living record of every victim. Their names literally carved into its structure. Shows the creature learning new manipulation tactics, shifting from pleading to mockery to childhood terror. The environment itself, trees, stones, reacts to intruders, proving the horror is territorial as much as supernatural. Introduces existential horror. Is this a warning of what will happen, or has it already happened to others? Explore the thing wearing your face and what it wants. Reveal the village's original sin that started the curse. A desperate run through the sentient forest as the well creature gives chase. Which nightmare shall we unfold next? The choice whispers in the dark. The skeletal fingers scrabbled against moss-slick stone as the thing wearing your face emerged inch by terrible inch from the well. Moonlight caught its features, your features, but warped, stretched like wax left too long in the sun. Its mouth moved out of sync with the nursery rhyme still dripping from its lips. Hush now, don't you cry. The voice fractured mid-verse, splitting into a chorus of whispers, all the names carved into the well's stones, speaking through its stolen throat. You stumbled back, boots slipping on the suddenly damp earth. The clearing had changed. The trees now formed a perfect circle, their branches interlocked like clasped fingers. No escape. The doppelganger hauled itself fully onto the well's edge, moving with the jerky precision of a marionette learning its strings. Its head tilted too far to one side, exposing the dark hollow where its spine should have been. We remember, it said in Jay Carter's voice. We always remember, echoed the innkeeper's tone from its gaping mouth. Then it lunged, not at you, at the ground where your shadow pooled in the moonlight. Its fingers pierced the darkness like spears, and you screamed as white-hot pain lanced up your legs, because that wasn't just shadow anymore. Thin tendrils of blackness had rooted you to the earth, spreading from your feet like ink in water. The more you struggled, the faster they climbed. The doppelganger smiled with your teeth. Almost supper time, it giggled in the dead girl's voice from the square. From the well's depths came a wet, rending sound. Something much older than the mimic was waking up, and it was hungry. Reveals the true danger of moonlight in Black Hollow. It gives the horrors an anchor to their prey, not just to terrify, but to prepare victims for whatever dwells below. Shows the well creature can cycle through all its victims' voices and memories. Physical corruption accelerates. The protagonist's body begins betraying them as the village's curse takes hold. Let the well's ancient horror fully emerge with a cacophony of stolen faces and voices. Reveal why the villagers really keep outsiders. To feed something far worse than the bride, fight the binding darkness as the forest itself becomes a teeth-filled maw. The well's whispers grow louder. Which truth will you hear first? The pain was a living thing now, crawling up your legs like vines of molten iron as the shadow rooted you to the cursed earth. The doppelganger crouched before you, its stolen face inches from yours, its breath smelling of damp soil and opened graves. They never tell you the truth, it whispered in the innkeeper's voice. Not until it's too late. Then its fingers plunged into its own chest, not with a scream, but with a wet, satisfied sigh, and peeled back its ribcage like rotted parchment. Inside, where a heart should have been, lay a writhing nest of blackened roots, pulsing in time with your own frantic heartbeat. This is what happens, it gurgled, now speaking with the voice of the girl in the blue dress. When the hollow claims you. The roots inside its chest strained toward you, quivering with hunger. Then, a shotgun blast shattered the night. The doppelganger's head exploded in a shower of splintered bone and clotted earth. The innkeeper stood at the tree line, smoke curling from his weapon, his face a mask of grim resignation. Told you not to go out after dark, he spat. But it was too late for warnings. The thing in the well shrieked, a sound that tore the air like fabric ripping. The ground trembled as roots erupted from the soil, whipping through the clearing like serpents. The innkeeper didn't flinch as they wrapped around his legs, dragging him toward the well. "Run!" he roared. "Not to you, but to the village." And then you understood. The villagers weren't hiding from the dark. They were feeding it. Every outsider, every wanderer, every Jay Carter who didn't heed the warnings. Sacrifices to keep the well sleeping, to keep the thing inside from waking fully. The innkeeper met your eyes as the roots pulled him over the edge. His last words weren't a curse, but a plea. "Don't let it take your name." Then the well swallowed him whole, and the village bell began to toll, not a warning, a dinner bell. The awful truth. The well's hunger, the roots, the doppelganger, all just extensions of something far older beneath Black Hollow. The villagers' role, not victims, but keepers of a horrific pact, feeding outsiders to delay their own fate. The naming curse. Why the ledger at the inn mattered. Names have power, and the well remembers them all. No heroes here. Even the innkeeper's sacrifice was just part of the cycle, not redemption. The well's full horror emerges as it claims its latest offerings. Escape through a village now actively hunting you. Discover what truly happens to those taken by the well. The bell is ringing. The feast begins. Will you run, or will you finally see what's been waiting in the dark all along? The shotgun's echo still hung in the air when the first villagers emerged from their homes. Not frightened, not surprised, carrying torches that burned with that same unnatural blue fire you'd seen in the cellar. Their faces were blank as butcher's blocks, their footsteps moving in perfect unison toward the clearing, toward you. The roots had retreated when the innkeeper fell, leaving your legs numb but free. You stumbled backward, boots slipping on the now glistening cobblestones. That's when you saw it. The black sludge from the well was spreading through the village like veins, pulsing as it connected each house, each resident, back to that gaping maw in the forest. The girl in the blue dress stood at the front of the procession. Her eyes were gone. In their place, tiny rootlets twitched and curled, drinking in the moonlight. "We tried to warn you," she said with the innkeeper's voice. "Now you'll feed the hollow like the rest." The torches flared. The sludge at your feet surged upward, forming grasping hands that mirrored your own movements, a second too slow, like a distorted reflection. You lashed out, but your fist passed through the blackness as it solidified into something new, something familiar. Your shadow wasn't yours anymore. It grinned back at you with too many teeth. The villagers began to chant, not in English, not in any human tongue, but in the creaking, groaning language of the trees. The wells shrieking answered, shaking the earth as something colossal began to rise from its depths. You caught one last glimpse of the innkeeper's face in the swirling black mass, his mouth open in a silent scream as roots burst from his eye sockets. Then the sludge reached your chest. Cold. So cold. The last thing you heard before the darkness took you was the bell, and the awful guttural sound of your own voice joining the chant. The village is alive. The houses, the trees, even the cobblestones, all part of the same hungry organism, assimilation. Victims don't just die, they become part of the Hollow's collective consciousness. No escape. The shadow play reveals the protagonist was never truly separate from the curse. Cyclical horror. The chanting suggests this ritual has happened countless times before. Experience the transformation as roots rewrite your flesh, a fleeting chance to warn the next outsider. Your consciousness disperses through the ancient entity, your scream dissolved into the black sludge filling your throat. The villagers' chanting vibrated through your bones as the roots slithered beneath your skin, not tearing, rewriting. Memories flashed like dying embers. A weeping woman in Puritan garb, forced into the well by torchlight. How he'd led his own brother to the clearing to spare himself. Jay Carter's realization. The way he'd begged as the roots grew from his eyeballs. The girl in blue pressed her forehead to yours, her roots entwined with yours in a grotesque kiss. "See?" whispered 100 stolen voices through her lips. The truth of Black Hollow. The well wasn't a prison for some monster. It was a womb, and you were its newest midwife. The transformation. Your spine arched as bark erupted across your back. Villagers gathered around, their hands tender as gardeners planting seeds. The sludge coalesced into a pulsing umbilical cord, dragging you toward the well. From its depths gleamed countless pairs of eyes, all yours, all blinking in unison. The last human thought flickered. This isn't happening to me. This is me happening to everything else. Then the roots sang their final hymn, and Black Hollow welcomed home its missing piece. 3 weeks later, a trucker drops off a hitchhiker at the crossroads. The young man shoulders his backpack, squinting at the weathered sign. Black Hollow. Population 88. From the inn's upstairs window, something with familiar eyes watches him approach. Behind the front desk, the ledger lies open to a fresh page. The bell above the door jingles. Somewhere deep underground, the roots stir. The new victim's shadow stretches toward the well, in the wrong direction. Would you prefer an alternate ending, where some fragment of the protagonist survives? Or shall we let the roots consume all? The sludge had reached your chin when the screaming started. Not yours, the villagers'. The girl in blue staggered back, roots exploding from her mouth as the innkeeper's shotgun tumbled from her grasp. The torchlight revealed the awful truth. Her veins had turned black beneath translucent skin. "Wrong," she gurgled. "You're wrong." The well's shrieking reached a fever pitch. The roots binding you convulsed as if scalded. That's when you felt it. The thing the hollow had missed. The flask, the innkeeper's bitter whiskey still burned in your stomach. Not liquor, holy water from the abandoned chapel. The roots couldn't digest it. You vomited black sludge onto the cobblestones. It writhed like a living thing before dissolving into acrid smoke. The villagers howled as the connection snapped, their own root-bound flesh beginning to smolder. The escape. You ran as the village consumed itself. Houses collapsed into sinkholes of thrashing roots. The well vomited up decades of half-digested victims. The girl in blue's final scream became the wind itself. At the crossroads, dawn's first light revealed the truth. No sign of Black Hollow remained. Just an overgrown path ending at a weathered wellstone half buried in ferns. The trucker who found you raving swore no such town existed. But when the doctors cut away your shirt, they froze. Beneath your collarbone, 4 parallel scars pulsed faintly, like something beneath the soil, dreaming, waiting. Would you like to explore the chapel's role in the next cycle, or is this the perfect note to end on? The roots are listening. The hospital discharged you after 30 days. The doctors called it trauma-induced psychosis. The police stopped returning your calls when you showed them the scars. But you knew. The whiskey flask sat heavy in your pocket as you stood before the abandoned chapel at the edge of town, the one place the roots had avoided. The door groaned open to reveal wall carvings depicting villagers feeding something in a pit, a rusted baptismal font filled with blackened roots. The original ledger, 1793 to 1921, showing every guest who'd ever disappeared. The final page bore your name in fresh ink. Beneath the altar, You found the innkeeper's true legacy. A silver dagger wrapped in yellowed psalm versus vials of whiskey, labeled with dates matching disappearances, a child's drawing of the well with the caption, "Grandpa says, don't wake the sleeper." The floor trembled. Something scratched at the chapel's foundation. Pour holy water into your wounds and let the roots guide you back for one final confrontation. Burn the ledger and become the hitchhiker at the crossroads for the next traveler. Drink the oldest whiskey and finally hear the roots' full story. The roots are growing through the floorboards now. Which will it be? The chapel walls trembled as the scratching beneath the floorboards grew more frantic. The roots had followed you, not through the soil, but through the scars beneath your collarbone, the ones that pulsed in time with some distant, monstrous heartbeat. The holy water vials clinked together in your shaking hands as the truth settled upon you like a burial shroud. Black Hollow wasn't done with you yet. Outside, the wind carried voices, not human, but perfect imitations. They called your name in the tones of people you'd once known, your mother, your best friend, the innkeeper. But beneath the mimicry lurked that wet, clicking sound, the one that had dripped from the well's lips. You burst through the chapel's back door into a nightmare. The forest was moving, trees twisted like writhing bodies, their bark splitting to reveal glistening root-strung tendons beneath. The path back to the road slithered like a serpent, coiling in on itself. And the well, God, the well, was no longer in the clearing. It gaped ahead of you, its stones now fused with the chapel's outer wall, its depths exhaling a breath that smelled of turned earth and rotting hymnals. Their mouths stretched too wide, their teeth dark with soil, their eyes vacant pits, where roots now bloomed like grotesque flowers. The girl in blue led them, her fingers fused into a single claw-like appendage. She pointed at your chest, at the scars that now itched beneath your shirt. "You're still hungry," she crooned in the innkeeper's voice. "We can hear it growling inside you." That's when you felt it. The gnawing. Not in your stomach, in your bones. The roots had left something behind, something alive. Not toward the road, that was gone. Not toward the fields, they pulsed like living flesh. But toward the well itself, its maw now lined with what looked like teeth carved from the chapel's broken pews. The villagers didn't follow. They watched. As you reached the edge, the final horror struck you. The roots inside you weren't trying to kill you. They were trying to go home, and they were willing to tear you apart to get there. With the last of your strength, you raised the innkeeper's silver dagger and plunged it into your own scar. The scream that came wasn't yours. It came from the earth itself. Black sludge erupted from the wound, writhing as it hit the moonlight. The villagers collapsed like marionettes with cut strings. The well's teeth shattered, and as the first true dawn in centuries broke over Black Hollow, you realized two things. The roots inside you had gone still. The scars on your chest now spelled something in gnarled, flesh-knotted script. Next time, dig deeper. The protagonist's infection becomes both weapon and revelation. The well's true nature. Not just a monster, but a gate to something older. The only escape is to wound the thing inside you. The scar's message suggests this is a cycle with no true end. Walk away but hear roots whispering in your dreams. Return with shovel and holy water to unearth the chapel's crypt. Add your own name to the ledger. Voluntarily, the choice is yours. But remember, the roots never forget. The knife still quivered in your chest when the first true bird song echoed through the clearing. Not the mimic voices of Black Hollow, but something real, something untouched. The villagers' bodies lay scattered like felled timber, their root-strung veins withering in the dawn light. You expected the wound to kill you. Instead, it spoke. A voice like grinding stones rose from the blackened gash. Clever little sacrifice. The roots inside you weren't dead, they were listening. The walkback only foundation stones remained, moss already creeping over them. His shotgun lay rusted as if buried for decades, its stalk blooming with tiny white flowers, now visible, though your shadow still moved a second too slow. At the crossroads, a new signpost stood where Black Hollow had been doctors called your recovery miraculous. The scars formed strange ridges, not random, but letters. Running your fingers over them revealed the full message. The sleeper's roots drink deep in every wound we sow. You cut one thread, the web still grows. At night, your dreams smell of damp soil and chapel incense. Sometimes you wake with blackened leaves in your fists. Once, you found your bathroom mirror fogged with breath that wasn't yours. The trucker who drove you home disappeared last Tuesday. His flask was found at the crossroads, full of whiskey, full of roots. Final choices: return with seeds in your pockets and a hymn on your lips. Wait at truck stops for the next curious traveler. Dig up your backyard where the soil's always warm. The roots are singing lullabies in your marrow now. The whiskey flask sat heavy on your nightstand, half full of something that wasn't liquor. In the 3 months since Black Hollow vanished, you'd learned the scars grow, new ridges form after every nightmare, spelling fresh warnings. The gift remains. You can now hear roots whispering under hospital floors. The hunger starts. Your reflection blinks a second too slow in mirrors. Tonight, the dream is different. You stand in the chapel again, but the well is now a gnarled tree growing through the broken altar. Its roots cradle the villagers, not dead, but dormant, their chests rising in unison like a sleeping beast's ribs. The girl in blue opens her milky eyes. You didn't think it was that easy? The awakening you wake to. Black sap crusting your nostrils, 4 perfect mud footprints leading from your bed to the closet, the smell of chapel incense clinging to your thrashing sweat sheets. The flask is empty. On your nightstand, a single root has grown through the wood overnight, blooming with a tiny blue flower identical to the dead girl's dress. The invitation. Your reflection no longer matches your movements. It smiles when you don't. It points to the backyard where the earth has begun to bulge unnaturally. The roots in your bones hum in recognition. Beneath your fingernails, black soil. Between your teeth, the taste of old hymns. In your ears, the well's new voice. Come home, it whispers with your own vocal cords. We kept a place for you at the table. The last baptism. Boil holy water and pour it into your scars. The gardener's choice. Plant the blue flower in a graveyard at midnight. The hollow communion. Drink the black sap and finally understand. The roots are singing in your veins now. The black sap coats your tongue like liquid obsidian, thick with the memory of centuries. It tastes of turned earth and chapel incense, of the copper tang of old sacrifices, of something older than language. Your throat convulses, but it's too late. The roots in your marrow sing in recognition. The world peels away like rotting wallpaper. What the sap shows you, the first planting, 1673, Puritans dragging a screaming woman to the clearing. Not a well then, just a hole. How her blood made the first roots twitch. The innkeeper's betrayal, 1942. His brother's face as the roots filled his mouth. The ledger entry burning as he writes, J. Hollow, room 4. The way the whiskey first turned to holy water in his flask. Your true arrival. Not chance, but invitation. The trucker's eyes glinting black as he dropped you at the crossroads. your shadow already stretching toward the well before you took your first step. The final revelation. The well was never the monster. You are. Every outsider carries the seed. The village just cultivates it. The girl in blue stands before you now, her hollowed-out smile tender as she presses a hand to your chest. The scars split open like overripe fruit. Welcome home, she whispers as the roots embrace you. Somewhere, a truck engine rumbles to life. Somewhere, a new backpacker thumbs a ride. Somewhere, a chapel door creaks open, and deep beneath the earth, the sleeper opens one eye. Spit the sap into an empty flask, and walk the highways, warning others, let the roots take you fully, becoming the well's new voice. Swallow the knife like the innkeeper did, and see what grows, the cycle continues. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, hit that like button, subscribe, and ring the bell for more. Let me know your thoughts in the comments. I'd love to hear from you. See you in the next one. Bye for now.